because really today experience is the new expectation. So why don't we, because in the spirit of a Neuehouse, why don't we start with Jill talking about HarperCollins and the big move.
HarperCollins is a global book publisher that has been headquartered in Manhattan. We've been in our current office for about 40 years, but in Midtown for much longer than that. We are moving downtown, a little bit south of City Hall this May. So we are taking on a huge change culturally, industry-wise. It's also a big change. Most of the big publishers are in Midtown. They're slowly moving around, but we are one of the pioneers. That was a big change for us. Our current office is about 20 floors of very small floor plates. That's almost a maze with a lot of doors and walls. It's not a very inviting experience for our guests, our authors, agents, employees that come into the space. So that was really important in our design and vision, was to do away with that and kind of really think about what our author and agents and new employees, prospective employees see and feel when they walk into our space. So that's what we worked with Environetics. That was our main goal, to be the pioneering publisher that was brave enough to kind of leave the circle that we were all in Midtown, but to also change the layout and the look and feel of our space.
And this was driven from you as the client to
absolutely
absorb this change.
So to accomplish this vision and establish it into a space, we were tasked with a few different areas, and one of which is single most important, the celebrating HarperCollins' heritage and projecting it forward with a new vision of global and future-oriented company. So the way that we approach the design is to really embracing the brand and storytelling of the experience from the arrival, whether it be an author, an agent, or employee, or any visitors for that matter, from the arrival point through the journey and to the destination, whether it's your workstation or you're seeing an editor. Instead of going through the traditional method of getting off the elevator of a floor and you go into looking for a wall sign somewhere and going through a maze of walls and going to see an editor, you actually go through the whole HarperCollins experience, through their history, through their vision, and before you know it, walking through the reception, through the book corridor, through the vision wall and the history wall, and every nook and cranny that's celebrating HarperCollins, you see, before you even know it, you see what HarperCollins is about. So whether you're an established Nobel Prize author or you're a blogger who's starting to write a book, you will see who you're going to work with. In an open plan, you'll see the designers who's designing your book jacket, to managing editors who's proofreading your books. So you're there and you feel like you're a family, you're in a place. So that was really important goal, to translate that into the design.
Right, for authors to understand that you have 700 people working to make your book, and you can kind of see it all unfolding in front of you, where in our current space, you don't see that at all. You see the one person that you came to see in your office, in our office. You walk in, you see that person, you have a meeting, and you leave, where that won't be the experience in our new home downtown.
So let's hear from you, Barry, on multifamily.
I guess it's a really interesting shift that's happening in how we perceive spaces, such as hotel and high-rise. It's much like the city. We used to think of the city primarily as a skyline of New York, but I think now we really think about the city as a street. It's the energy of the street. So we have the sort of classic movies of the 50s, which is the sort of approach to the skyline of New York. But I think now it's the street level energy. It's how you approach the street. It's that experience. And that sort of same thing is happening in hotel spaces, high-rise residential lobbies. It's the overall experience, not just the edifice, but the interior experience from the moment you approach on the street to get inside. And it's all those experiences, all those touch points that connect you to this. So that kind of narrative that drives you through is very important. And in the design process, you want to even storyboard this from from the street to slumber, every single point along the way, where you meet a concierge, where you come into a space, where you meet the lobby, where you're connecting to this. And those connections to that space offer sort of both emotional reward and also kind of the chance for branding to really connect this and sell the space. So I think there's this interesting change in how we think about these big buildings, the urban energy, New York City, and it's really translating in a big kind of macro way on this idea of hotel spaces, hospitality, because obviously hotels and lobbies have always been very similar in both high-rise residential and hotel spaces. But I think it's really about a new energy, a new experience that you want to like connect with, you want to be a part of, and not just what the Waldorf Astoria looks like on the outside. And so I think people also travel a lot now. As you travel a lot, you experience a lot, and you want those same connective ideas that you find on your trips to be present in the place you live. And so what really happens, and I'll let Michael talk about this is the way you help sell a space, both as a condo and as a rental, how you connect it to all generations. And it becomes the brand that expresses where you want to live. So it's the city where you want to live in, and it's the hotel, the space and the tower you want to live in.
Yeah, I obviously totally agree with that. The issue, and what's most relevant, I think, to our work is that, certainly it starts in hotels in a highly amenitized environment. That's what we're certainly doing at Hudson Yards. But it began, if you look at least in our portfolio, certainly with Time Warner Center being a place with very mixed use. We embrace mixed use, so having retail, hotel, residential, office space, cultural, in jazz, and most recently manifest in MIMA, which is on 42nd and 10th Avenue, where talk about amenitized, I mean, that's 40,000 square feet of amenity space. That's an acre of amenity space in an 800-unit building. So extraordinary, because as we actually optimize the floor plates of residential buildings, asterisk make them smaller for your apartment, you actually end up spending more time in these social spaces. So having a screening room, having a kitchen you could rent, having a place that you could actually have a party in, because you won't have a party in your apartment, but you will rent a party room down on the 4th floor and actually take advantage of that. So we've seen these amenity spaces growing in importance, certainly inspired largely by hospitality. And now on Hudson Yards, which is a project which I don't have to say is extraordinary by any scale, 17 million square feet, we've taken that to a whole nother level of half. It's funny you mentioned street. Half of our site is dedicated to public open space. So we can't build on half of our site. It has to be parks. So that's a way of showing that amenities actually matter to people that are making decisions today. And our first office tenants, funny enough, are they're not banks and they're not law firms, but it's Coach, L'Oreal, SAP, and Time Warner, companies that actually value at the leading edge of valuing these amenities. So we were taking things that we learned in hotel spaces, we deployed them in residential spaces, and now we're actually even bringing them to office spaces to show that this idea of concierge service matters to every single user, not just someone who's staying in a hotel room for one night or a couple nights, but as someone who lives in their apartment and doesn't have time to go shopping or doesn't want to walk their dog because they're working too hard, or even an office worker who wants to have their Uber car sitting there right immediately, or have the gym in the building. So this idea, the world is blending very much in terms of hospitality, inspiring actually every type of asset class.
That actually reminds me of something that I read earlier. It was an article by a futurist, and he coined the phrase leisure, and it was blurred lines where you're blending business and pleasure, which is, I think, really what we're talking about today. And it's just that whole concept where, private and personal lives are all blended. So we want to hear more about Hudson Yards, but let's hear how healthcare is really meeting this challenge.
Well, I'll just give you CityMD is urgent care provider here in the city. I'm not sure, certainly not as well known as the Hudson Yards project, but we have 24 centers operating medical facilities across New York City and Long Island, with about another 50 centers in development as we expand into New Jersey. We provide access to care, as a lot of you are reading about Obamacare coming through. And access to care has been an issue in healthcare for the last 10 years. And CityMD is really focusing on convenient, quality care for patients who are in need. Part of that, and I'll give this over to Brad, but part of the shift that's probably happened 10 years ago and how it affects design, and at least in my mind, is there's been a physician-centric model for as long as I can remember. I'm a physician by training, I guess still technically a physician. But physician-centric models really are focused, obviously, on the physician, and the way we build facilities, the way hospital brick-and-mortar facilities are currently built, if you ever walk through Beth Israel, is certainly not conducive towards the patient experience. So we've recognized that in terms of how we build our spaces, and that's something we try to focus on in terms of the multiple touch points shifting from the physician to the patient. We focus on the quality of care from the patient's perspective, but also on the door, on the countertop, on the seat, on the flow of the patient through the facility. So that's part of the reason why design has really come to the forefront for healthcare, for us at least.
Yeah, and also the model of healthcare has really changed over the last 10 to 12 years, where traditionally it's been based in a sterility model, which came to being around 1920, 25, where large institutions, large healthcare institutions, were based around antimicrobial, keeping infections to a minimum. It wasn't really patient-centric, it was physician-centric. Matter of fact, today in the Wall Street Journal was an interesting article that people who go to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA go through tremendous anxiety because it's a 24-acre facility that's been renovated numerous times, and they can't get from point A to point B. The doctors can, but the patients can't. They don't understand the signage, they don't understand the wayfinding. The model is different, so not only from a patient-centric model, but also the sterility model. Now we've got a lot of, CityMD, one of them, ambulatory centers, ambulatory meaning outpatient, walk-in care. These are facilities and brands, new brands, that have been either spun off from the bigger institutions, the bigger hospital networks, or new brands that are just groups of physicians, the doctor's model, as they say, becoming new brands out there in the marketplace. And that is a big challenge for design. The good thing for design and designers and everyone out here is that we're not constrained anymore by this big kind of monster of this sterility model. Now we have a way to kind of spread our wings. We can experiment with it being patient-centric. It's hospitality design, but I kind of say it's more hospitable design. It's friendlier design than what we've ever come across in the hospital ER rooms that we've gone to. It's hospitable, it's friendly, it's sociable.
Well, talk about the concept that, it's flexible healthcare for, they can opt in to do that hours that work for them. Because I think that also talks, about the driving the design, Brad, how you created that whole brand narrative for this new concept.
Well, the brand narrative is really based upon this outpatient model. It's people that are looking at the brand for the first time. And what design has to do then, because they're looking at it for the first time, they have to have a confidence level in the doctoring that's going to occur in these facilities. So the first thing that we have to do with a new brand, a new healthcare brand, is basically present confidence right at the door. And this is a big word, confidence. It's people have to have, they have to be have an affinity towards what kind of healthcare they're going to get. We were very fortunate with CityMD at the outset, in that our flagship was 23rd Street, and we were blessed as designers with great architecture of Ladies Mile with these soaring columns, and we were able to use the architecture as almost stage set design in a way to give the gravitas to the doctors and give a comfort level to patients when they went in there for the first time, using different materials, using architecture, using forms that they rarely have seen, especially in New York in the healthcare industry.
So what do you feel is the biggest challenge in designing a non-hospitality space in today's hospitality influence world?
For healthcare, it's really a balancing act. So we looked at traditionally healthcare. When you think of a physician's office, you think of a very professional environment, and you think of a very sterile environment. You don't necessarily think of, and this is all new to me over the last 2 years, Knoll products. You don't think of high-end, W Hotel-ish finishes. And actually, our CEO constantly talks about the W Hotel. Every time he goes to a W, he says, "Oh, I love that. Why can't we do that?" And I just shake my head and say, "I don't think we can bring the W into healthcare." So that's one of our sides. So there is a balancing act that goes on there, because you can't alienate the patient. You can't be too cool. You can't be too cutting edge. Patients are, especially when they reach out to physicians, they expect a certain level of professionalism.
Has to be modulated down a bit.
Absolutely. And then the durability of our facilities. I know we don't like the word sterile, but we are in healthcare, so the facilities have to be somewhat sterile. So balancing those two things, and has been our specific challenge.
Yeah, and I think for an interior designer, I mean, most of you work on hotels. I mean, you're in a hotel for a night or 2 nights or 3 nights, so there's a degree of, I'll say, exuberance that you'll accept in a hotel from a design perspective. It could be a little cool or a little radical, which you won't necessarily accept in your home where you live or the condominium that you have paid a couple $1 million for. So, you know, there's a degree of kind of tempering of expectations from a pure design perspective. There's also churn. You know, hotels reinvent themselves and reinvent their brands every, 10 years. I mean, you could talk about that. I mean, the fact that hotels can also be much more fluid in terms of their approach to design because of the shortness of the stay of the individual, but also they bake in the fact that they need to be fresh and refresh. You don't redo an office building lobby every 10 years. You don't redo a condominium lobby every 10 years. I mean, maybe you do on a rental, and now we're beginning to look at rentals that the Rockwell Group is starting to look at some of the lobbies again to refresh them. So there is definitely this churn which can happen in some products, but not in all of them.
And in Hudson Yards, in the non-hospitality spaces, how are you incorporating just offering concierge amenities? And, let's talk about that a little more.
Sure. I mean, it's endemic to the project that we have a lot of different uses there. So we have a 1 million square foot shopping mall, so that's a huge amenity. We have over 100,000 square feet of food, which will all be delivered to the different users there. So we're certainly taking the amenities and ratcheting them up at an enormous scale, which is certainly finding a way of deploying it. But I think the biggest challenge, to answer your question more directly, is just cost. Being able to spend enough money to make it a worthy experience. So you walk around down here, and we could not, afford to outfit our public spaces the way they are here. You can't afford. The metrics of an office building don't really promote that as much as you would like to do it. So I think the biggest hurdle is really cost on an immediate level. While we're doing it, you could pro forma a mall and make sure that it'll work. Getting down to the fine level of design detail that you do find in hospitality is more of a challenge, I think, just from a cost perspective, and convincing the CEO to spend a little bit more on the social spaces that are built into their office buildings.
But I think it's not all about just also about cost. I think you said this blurring, the blurred lines. In fact, when we first asked the question, a lot of us are now thinking there's not as much difference between hospitality and other spaces. What we kind of expected in the first space, which is home, and the third space, which became Starbucks, we also want our second space, which is work. We sort of expect that same level, which is what hospitality offers, which is really comfort and support in the environment you're in. And it could be at a number of different levels. And so in a medical space, it's really providing that comfort and support that really makes you feel good. You feel with friends. You feel, kind of not alienated. And I think that is the kind of piece that is so uniformly happening that the kind of differences are becoming minimized. And the blurring is kind of happening across the board. So even though we proposed the topic has already sort of jumped into the conversation and changed things already around the world that we see.
And I think also, the subtext of this is the millennials driving a lot of this, where they want really in their adult life, all areas when they come home, to have, an elevated, student lounge. They want all those amenities. In the workplace, I think it's been particularly challenging, retaining talent and even attracting it, to make sure that you have all these different kind of, just like healthcare not being sterile. I think workplaces that look very staid are not as appealing to.
Sure, and it's part of the confidence with healthcare that when this age group walks in, they feel familiar with the surroundings. Sure, the glamour is dummied down a bit from the hotel, restaurant, bar, but it's it's something that they can relate to. So as soon as they walk in, they're feeling good about the place, and that's very important in our waiting rooms and things.
I think Annie could talk about the transformation of the workplace.
Yeah,
because it's happening so rapidly, of bringing the same features of support, comfort, amenities.
I think for, not to cut you off, I think for HarperCollins, it was twofold. It was aesthetic and functionally. We were challenged in both areas. We wanted to appeal to our literary heritage, the Mark Twain, the Shel Silverstein, the Harper Lee, E.B. White, literary giants that we are home to, we are the home of. But also Cameron Diaz and Amanda Knox have published their books with us as well. So making sure that we cover and we make all our authors and agents feel comfortable in our space, and they walk into our space and feel like this is a home, this is where they want to be. Capturing that was hard for us to visualize, which we spent a lot of time with our architect kind of coming up with designs and ways to kind of walk that fine line. We didn't want to be a totally digital screens and flashy and very modern, but we also didn't want to look like a library. So what was that fine line was a challenge for us.
So
So that leads to the next question almost, like how materials actually inform the space.
right. So the challenges were twofold for HarperCollins. One is to bridging the gap of generations. So CEO of HarperCollins, Brian Murray, showed us this old magazine that pictured this, one of the old editors who still worked there, had a pipe in the photo, and he was talking background of the books of mounds of books of library, and that's how he was pictured a long time ago. And that was okay to be photographed in the office that way in the Mad Men era. And between that generation to the bloggers, the ebook writers, and the new authors, and high school students, college students coming up with their own books. So bridging the gap was important in design. Also, geography. HarperCollins is a global company. They want to celebrate all their imprints. They are big, giant publishers, but they didn't want to eliminate or alienate any of their little imprints or small publishing sub-companies. So they wanted to celebrate all ages and all locations and all their imprints. So having a very friendly and Brad said hospitable material and incorporating how that relates to your workspace was really important. So as you walk out, we eliminated all the big screens that we initially talked about. We have display case made of wood and lacquer, and you celebrate the old history and the vision there. We have wood floor as you walk out. We have original columns. We have concrete meeting wood. We have a little bit of glass, but some areas colored. We have beautiful gray backdrop with punctuations of colors. So we were very careful not to offend any generations and have everybody feel comfortable. The pantry is very front forward as you walk off the elevator, walk off the reception, and you're welcome there, and you can have a party, you can work there. So Neuehouse is a really good example of how the new generations can work. As you walk through, there's no giant private office or giant desk or returns or wardrobe. You just park anywhere and you work. So we have that generation to, I really need to have my private office. So we were carefully marrying the two with, and we needed to be really truthful to the material. So the metal, the wood, the earth tones, the gray tones, celebrating the utilitarian original concept of the bookcase. What does the bookcase do? It holds the books. So keep going back to the original material and the original concept, and the heritage of HarperCollins was really important key to marry these gaps and bridge these gaps.
Yeah, what we've focused on in terms of millennials, and for us it's really attracting and retaining talent for our companies and our tenants. It really is how we deploy technology. I mean, it's one of those things that we almost don't even have to do anything anymore, because New York City, particularly this neighborhood, has become such a hotbed for creating new technologies, which is basically taking software and deploying it in a way that people will pay a little extra to use. So Seamless Web, Uber, Fresh Direct, all these things which completely take for granted the concierge services that you would normally get in a hotel, ordering room service or having a car waiting for you. I mean, all of these things are so embedded in our lives now that we're figuring out a way in Hudson Yards to make this connected community, which actually it's the first community developed for this generation, purely the first 21st century community where we have everything embedded into the infrastructure of the place, because we have 6 million square feet being built at once, which is a lot. By the way, but we're doing well. And how do you make decisions on technology?
Every time you talk about it, it's behind you, which is so cool.
I planned that.
You're good.
But even I'm 42 years old, so like I don't do technology the way that someone who's 22 years old embraces technology. And so trying to think ahead at how people will begin to work in the 21st century has been a challenge for us, but one we're embracing, because if you lay the infrastructure, people will take advantage of it and build things on their own.
Well, the new generation really, the statistics are that 80% of their time they work collaboratively, 20%, you know, yeah. And then the hotel, I've been reading the statistics, like 85% of travelers really like to work remotely, or they do work remotely, and 79% really like that. So that's a whole new paradigm shift. You know, that people can work anywhere, any place, anytime. And that's what I feel, you know, is driving a lot of this hospitality design trends and all the services that you used to only associate with hospitality.
Yeah, I mean, we've assumed that people will take as many meetings in the public space as they will in the restaurant, as they will in the conference room on the 42nd floor. So thinking about that blurred line that you mentioned before of how people are working differently, that's kind of built into how we're thinking about this neighborhood.
Leisure.
And the same way, like with business centers, you think about the business center that hotels used to have. It seems so inappropriate because you can work anywhere now. You could actually, and you do work anywhere. You can work anytime. That a place that's just dedicated to work seems outdated, outmoded. You want the lobby to be as comfortable a setting when you walk into your tower that you can sit down, bring your laptop, get your cup of coffee. You want that sort of blurring of lines so that when we look at actually some hotel lobbies now and program spaces, you want to be able to sort of move anywhere and have a variety of settings, a variety of places that you can sit down, you can work, you can sort of play and do all those pieces. I think that is this technology piece is driving this so fast and changing everything. Because we used to sit at our desks, we used to work at alone time, and now we actually have to open up and be working together and collaboratively. So the division is actually more 50-50 when it used to be that you'd sit at your desk 80% of the time and only 20% of the time get in the conference room. So it's a big shift that's informing every sector of the marketplace.
And the futurist article I read, they actually dubbed the meeting rooms business playgrounds because it incorporated all that technology and I guess fun stuff. Okay, so I think everyone wants to know what type of behavioral or cultural changes do we see in the workplace with these hospitality elements being introduced. I mean, I think a wonderful example is the pantry that used to be in the back and really very little attention was paid to that. And now everybody needs like the Starbucks in the front.
Yeah, it's more of a gathering space. It's a communal hangout area where you can just plug your laptop in. You can work anywhere. It's really very much changed. In our current building, it's almost like a closet that happens to have a sink and a refrigerator, and you just keep your lunch in there. But in our new space, it'll be a beautiful bar with a great setup that is very inviting for you to kind of spend your afternoon there and have your meetings and take your conference calls. But I think for us, for HarperCollins, one of the big behavioral cultural changes is we need to be more flexible with our industry and the way ebooks are going. It's completely changed where we were 5 years ago. We think we know where we're going in the next 5 and 10 years, but we need to be flexible. And things like furniture and design and layout all very much lent itself to that in our new space. Being able to quickly change a conference room into more workspace or vice versa was very important and something that we did spend a lot of time planning and discussing when we designed it.
Interesting behavioral change in the workplace is people don't go to work. People go to work to meet. So the very fact that we talked about, Michael touched upon, the technology lets you work anywhere. So people work from home. And one of the hotel hospitality amenities that we're forgetting oftentimes is you can actually go to your room and retire and be alone. So that can happen very easily with these residential towers. Everything respects your privacy. Everyone gives you your space. So we often talk about why do you go to work anymore? And that is to meet and collaborate. And people don't necessarily collaborate at the meeting rooms. People can collaborate via GoToMeeting, via share your file, via what we call Procore. Everything can be collaborative. But the workplace today needs to give you a reason to go to work. And that is to meet your people and actually have a FaceTime and be more productive in that way. So I have a friend who works at Google, and she works from home mostly. And she goes to work actually to go to Google Cafe because they have such good breakfast, and you can meet there. So these kind of amenities that people, the companies provide, actually, you need to be attractive to retain the talent and have them want to come to work. So very similar to hotel. Why do you go to Four Seasons versus W? There's got to be something that you like going there more. So why do you, if you can work anywhere, why do you work at HarperCollins, not Simon & Schuster? So those kind of harsh questions really need to be asked, and that needs to be implemented in design. And that's what we needed to really look at when we were designing new HarperCollins.
And I think we talked about that also, about the millennial, that they're, you know, they come into the workforce and they already have their Facebook page and their Twitter and their Instagram and their Pinterest and stuff. So they're branded already. So they come into your branded environment, and it has to resonate with who they perceive they are. And I think that's the big cultural shift I've noticed. So.
Yeah, and what you'll see, I think Coach is an interesting example for us. They moved, or are moving, from a 15-story brick loft building on 34th Street near 10th Avenue. They love the building, but obviously they've outgrown it. So they wanted to, replicate that experience, that kind of bricky, New Yorky, industrial look and feel, because they thought there was something authentic and New Yorky about that. And we're designing 52-story buildings that are all glass and metal. So clearly we couldn't do that, and we weren't going to build, tall brick buildings. But what they did, they actually cut a 15-story atrium in the base of their building. You'll see it in one of the renderings, and it aligns completely with the High Line. So it's a 15-story atrium where every floor will be connected. So they have this community, this vertical community campus at the base of their tower, which is, how they're beginning to work differently. So fine, they can't be in a loft building, but they could have this sense of community around this big architectural moment in the center of the building, which I think is going to be really fabulous and very unique for them. But it's finding a way of attracting talent, giving people a reason to come to work, to have this collaborative space. I think it's been a real challenge for companies.
And healthcare,
It's social media has really played big with this brand. I mean, it's really reached millennials in the city. They're walking into the city MD spaces, and their behavior's changing. They're not anticipating healthcare being served to them in this type of environment with the types of materials and the form and the overall environmental design of the places. We did a little post-occupancy survey of these on Yelp, believe it or not, and I was surprised at how many responses and reviews of City MD there were. And really, I mean, if you want to gauge behavioral changes and sentiments, go to Yelp, I guess. I mean, I just printed. I mean, we're all food critics now, right? I mean, but just printing. I sent a report to Dr. Shami a couple of months ago, and there were people saying I was shocked at how nice it was. I described it as the Ritz-Carlton of medical clinics. It's just unbelievable. Nicest urgent care facility I've ever seen. The cleanest. Flatiron location is brand new and was like waiting in a nice restaurant, as opposed to the normal dismal urgent care waiting rooms.
Well, our CEO knows Yelp very well, so
on
personal
there
friends
all
with
the
the CEO of Yelp, so maybe that's why. But
none of these are plans. There's no way.
No, for healthcare, one of the big changes for healthcare was we weren't even in the space. So first off, healthcare wasn't branded. It was the relationship to the provider. So if you were a patient, it was your doctor, and nothing else mattered. You could go into a crumbling facility, and and I do, and the tile is falling off the ceiling, but it was you and your provider. That's changing, and especially here in Manhattan, our patients are relating to our brand. So we're entering this market in terms of branding who we are, what we want to provide to the patient, and a lot of that obviously has to do with design. So this is a paradigm shift in the way patients see healthcare. They're really relating to what the brand is. I think Nike first, and then I think of what sneaker I want. That hasn't happened in healthcare. I think that's happening now.
So how does hospitality influence the workplace, the healthcare, the residential towers, the business aspect? Like, what is the return on the investment for implementing these hospitality design elements? And I think, I'd love to hear what you think, Michael.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to go into numbers, but we've done really well. I mean, in terms of attracting tenants and the types of tenants to our amenities, and the fact that we can't, look, we're not the cheapest game in town by any means. But there are three things that we're really pitching to tenants to get them to move here. One, densification, which you're all designers, so you understand we work in smaller and smaller and smaller workspaces. There's an inverse relationship because you actually have to increase the amount of public spaces you're providing as you shrink the amount of office spaces you're giving to particular workers. So we can get very, very efficient in our office buildings. Number two, we are providing all these amenities. 1 million square foot shopping mall, 100,000 square feet of food, 14 acres of public space. We have a third of the High Line on our site. We have a cultural facility on our site. We have great access to transportation. So all of these other amenities which we're adding on to it. And then the last thing, which is very important, is the neighborhood. You know, we happen to be in West Chelsea, the hottest neighborhood in Manhattan, growing at 5 times the rate of the rest of Manhattan. So for us, the return on investment is very, very good in terms of what we're able to give our tenants, because we're able to pitch, you know, these three major attributes, which allows us to compete with other office buildings throughout the city, because we think we're, again, not cheaper than them, but we have so many amenities. You don't necessarily have to have a Google-type cafeteria if I have, you know, 10 great restaurants on the 4th floor. You don't have to provide a gym in your office space if I happen to have a 60,000 square foot Equinox on site. So there are a lot of abilities that we're able to leverage the size of our, you know, not many people could do that. I mean, we just happen to have a really big site. So we can accommodate a lot of amenities. So, you know, bar none, our first building, 85% committed, and we haven't even put a shovel to the ground. 2 weeks ago, we announced Time Warner is moving lock, stock, and barrel over 1 million square feet from Time Warner Center to Hudson Yards. So we've been very, very successful in terms of spending a little bit more by providing these amenities, but certainly getting the return in terms of tenants coming to our site.
Can you just talk a little bit about that culture shed?
Sure, it's a city-funded project. Well, privately funded, but city-led. Right there. And it's a building which moves, like most buildings. It actually rolls out on wheels. I'm not kidding. It rolls out on wheels, and it creates this very, very large 18,000 square foot gallery space. It's a 7-level building designed by Diller, Scaffidi, Renfro, and David Rockwell, which will be extraordinary. It parallels the High Line. It moves, which they're very into, which is going to be very expensive to move. But we're really thrilled by it because it is, you know, talk about brand. It's brand neutral. It's not a MoMA. It's not a Guggenheim. It's not a Met. It's actually a Kunsthal, which is actually a timeshare of a bunch of different cultural facilities, which will, like this space, all occupied at different times. So one day you'll go in there and there's a big art show. Another day you'll go in there, it's a performance where it was leaked a couple of months ago that this will be the future home of New York's Fashion Week. So we're very, very excited about all the great things and all the amenities that will continue to drive traffic to it. But it will be an extraordinary and iconic building, certainly by any stretch of the imagination.
That really just looks sensational. And it is the most high-profile project in the city, so.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's very well positioned between the new number 7 and the High Line. It parallels the High Line. It's really going to be very, very apparent. You can see from one of the views, right, where the High Line curves along 30th Street. It's going to be right there, and it's enormous.
And it sounds like it encompasses everything we talked about tonight. So how do you feel? So I think it's important to understand, you know, why you're going to be incorporating hospitality design into these other areas. So there has to be a return on the investment or a benefit. So I just want to close by talking about how it's benefited the workplace and then healthcare. And then Barry, please, your way into it.
I think kind of similar to what Michael said, it's about retaining and attracting talent for HarperCollins to be the most innovative publisher that wasn't afraid of change, that wasn't afraid to take the step to go downtown and to create an open plan workspace is intriguing to authors and to potential employees. They want to be with the publisher that's going to be here in the next 10, 20, 30 years because the industry is changing very much, and they all won't remain if they're not innovative and looking for the next step. So creating a space that kind of is forward-thinking, is flexible, is prepared for the potential changes that are coming is very intriguing to potential college kids coming out of school, authors that are publishing their first book and looking for a home. We think that's the direction that they're going to look. They don't want to go to the old building that's crumbling, that's in a bad neighborhood with no forward-thinking collaboration or digital aspects to it. So I think that's our benefit.
That's really anticipating the future and the future of ebooks.
That it is.
Yeah, you know, more of the same actually. So we're identifying, our patients are identifying with a brand for the first time. The space speaks to both our patients and as well as to our providers. Our physicians are working in a space that's conducive to their needs, as well as patients receiving the brand and attaching that to the quality, which really they come to expect. So we're in a space now where we have an opportunity to provide quality care. The business is doing well. We're rolling out 60 centers this year across the metropolitan area. So yeah, I can't go into the specifics of numbers, but doing well, and that's our specific challenges because healthcare traditionally doesn't compete in the branding world, and it's starting to do that now.
I think it's also becoming a big differentiator for your brand. Obviously, there's other competitive offerings in New York that offer similar type of services. I think the branding is really differentiating them. It's also stealing share of voice or awareness from the other ones. Just the other week, one of your competitors was actually doing some street advertising on bicycles and billboards, and people were yelling out, "City MD, City MD," you know? So it's just, it's becoming, you know, it's becoming top of mind. The branding is helping it. Everything is.
We don't have
working
competitors.
together. They don't have
just to
competitors.
let you know. So.
Try to tell them that. But we do live in a parity world in some business segments in certain areas, and so the branding and the environmental design really helps City MD really differentiate themselves, and I think that's been a big success on that end.
As Jill touched upon, I think for HarperCollins, it was being the pioneer of the industry and providing the things that other companies don't. So they have quiet rooms where editors can go in, and it's different setting. There's a bar setting, there's a lounge setting, there's even Barca lounger that you can sort of like semi-lay down. When we first started designing, we did a very extensive questionnaire and answer sessions. And one of the things the editor said, I actually don't edit at work. I just have meetings, I'm on the phone all the time, I yell at people, then I go home.
No.
I go home, and actually I edit at my kitchen bar. Some said I edit at my bedroom, actually laying down. That's how I best think and edit. And some say I actually edit with my music on at a couch. So we try to create those rooms where you can actually go and edit. And if you create those enough, and you create your kitchen, you create your cafe, you have meeting room that's bar setting, you have an editing room that's a couch setting, and you recreate your home, then you don't really need a giant private office with meeting space here and this and this. So kind of what Michael touched upon, when you have all these amenities around you, your workspace can be very efficient. And being that pioneer really is the benefit of retaining and attaining new talent.
I think I'm sort of fortunate to have this different perspective also. Rockwell Group is going to celebrate their 30th year, and when I joined the firm a while back, it wasn't 30 years ago, that Rockwell Group was it was not the mainstream. The hospitality that we know of, like hotels, restaurants, particularly restaurants, was kind of on the fringes, and the mainstream did something else that was like, ooh, cool new Barcelona chair in my commercial space. But now I think and a developer told me this a few years ago, the mainstream has moved closer to us. So while 10 years ago they would never have considered us to design interior public spaces, now they would be top of mind, and hospitality designers are top of mind to design these spaces. Because as the culture of the world changes, millennials are in, boomers are going out, there's a whole new world that has to be supported in a different way. It's about collaboration. It's about identifying the space you work in, the space you live in, as being a part of your own personal brand. It's about kind of connecting in a way that feels personal and not impersonal. And for the boomers, which of course I'm a boomer, it was more individualistic. It was more like Mad Men. It's trying to get different levels, attain different pieces. It's very goal-oriented, but now it's collaboration is the buzzword. How do we work together? It's all about teamwork, and workplace has to support that. When you come into, it's not just about a key doctor being the most important relationship. It's understanding your whole sort of healthcare. So there's this kind of interesting shift where hospitality, I think, is supportive of a kind of change that's happening. And so there's actually not really hospitality. I think design is becoming blending the sort of blurred lines she's talking about. It's kind of like we're treating everything not in a way that supports kind of changes at our foot.
And people feel cared for.
Yes.
So that really concludes the presentation. I'd like to open the floor for some questions. Does anybody have a question for any of the panelists? Okay.
We talk a lot about millennials, and just to mention now boomers, by the way, I really hate those labels, but whatever. We're not really talking about the people in between who are familiar with what boomers are like, how they like working or living or consuming healthcare, what have you, and millennials who are all connected. And I'm one of those in-between people. So speak to me. What I have no problems with the digital age. My iPad is connected to this hand the second I get home, and I sleep with it basically. But speak to me. Speak to the people that know a little bit about both worlds and how what you're designing will help me.
We talked about that. Barry, you want to answer that? That's exactly what we discussed.
We use boomers, millennials to kind of showcase the demographic shifts that are happening, but everyone is actually really different, and there's no kind of nice, neat kind of way to wrap it all up, because when we create spaces, it has to appeal to all generations and all kind of people and all types. And so this is kind of a neat way of sort of talking about major changes that are afoot and how we can sort of see it. We could see it, like when Annie and I talk, I'm just like, it is so fast happening in the workspace, that how it's transforming and changing. It's no longer, as we said, like you used to sit at your desk, we're on a sea of other desks. Now you want to like come to the table like at Starbucks. And I think we all are can be open or conditioned to kind of do this. And the between the X generation between that kind of actually has the ability to kind of learn from both generations and respond to both. And I think that's all generations have to be kind of applied for. And the great thing about hospitality, it supports and comforts everyone to what their sort of abilities, their nature is, and not to kind of say like segment them in like, oh, here is a place for this or that. It's a convenient way for us to talk about it, but the truth is it's a much more complex and intergenerational, and all of us, we live in, I think we live as both our youth, our sense of our youth is still with us, as well as being old. So we're always having the duality and the contradictions are all part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It's not as binary as I think it's being described in the discussion, because one of the things that I find, we talk about designers.
Yes,
I like the musical interlude.
What
kinda like a-
generational musical?
It's like you're on hold at the doctor's office. You're on hold. Right.
Trailing boomer?
I invited
right.
them.
Design is interesting because, yes, change is happening fast, but, I mean, you're all designers. Change doesn't happen fast. It takes a generation to make this. So this is not a pivot. It's not like we're already now designing an office building. I'm still designing an office building the same way I would have designed it 20 years ago, basically. It still has elevators, it still has walls, it still has columns. It's pretty, but we do little things. I mean, from an architectural standpoint, we have floor-to-ceiling glass. Everybody likes that. It's floor-to-ceiling glass. It makes the view better. We have healthier air. Everybody benefits from that. So, there are, changes that happen incrementally, but it's interesting for me as we're pushing because, by the way, the decision makers are not millennials. The CEO who's making the decision is not the millennial, but he or she should be sensitive to the fact that they should retain talent at every level. So it really is a way of kind of polarizing it to make sure that you're getting the right stuff in the mix, because it takes a long time to convince your clients to do something any different from what they did before.
I have a question. So you guys all talked about kind of having different workspaces depending on what environment you need to create, et cetera, and collaboration as the buzzword. Can you talk a little bit more about open spaces? Because I've seen a lot, especially recently, that there is a little bit of a debate if an open space, and even in my company, like some people love it and some people hate it. It's, kicking in their ADD, it's driving them nuts, and other people it's wonderful. I'm just curious to what extent, your client base seems to find an open space a good thing, and in what places it's a bad thing, and then, you know, Annie in particular, it seems like you have a good mix, like the balance of both, with not only generations, but just different personality types, different work styles, etc.
Yes, so we get this question all the time. How open is open, and has open gone too far? And we're not all traders. The open space, I think in concept, it's not so much for the collaboration. You can collaborate in the meeting space and in team rooms. Open space is more about your presence and why you're there. So we earlier talked about why people go to work when you can work from home. I can work from this all the time. Actually, I have the questions here. I don't have a note. And the reason why we go to work, I go to work because I can work with my team. I can see them, and somebody will talk to me. And I didn't plan that meeting, but somebody will talk to me. I'll talk to somebody. I may go, oh, you're back from vacation. Oh, I needed to talk to you about this so-and-so project. So that sort of an accidental encounters and sort of seeing people and knowing other people are present is the really essence of the open space. How much open, whether it's all benching or where you have glass fronts or whether you have workstations with a certain amount of glass, that really that gets determined by the nature of the work of each client. We still have legal clients who would want offices. We have advertising clients or PR clients who wants everybody open. In our office, everybody's open except for one person who handles the payroll and benefits. So, and the trend is usually when you go open, you don't want to go back because it feels like if you're in the office, you are being punished. You're being sent to jail. So when it's all open, you want to be open. But like Michael said, when it's open, you also need to provide the amenities. So the reason why the desk footprint is getting a little bit smaller is because you have other resources to work. So if you were in your office 8 hours, 10 hours, 16 hours a day, working on your computer and meeting people when they come in, you work certain amount of time at your desk, and then you go to the lounge to have a meeting. You go to the large table out there at a benching, standing height, to look at some materials and have an encounter meeting. You have a cafe. We have a large cafe, dedicated, large space, really dedicated for this cafe at HarperCollins. You can have a meeting there. You can grab a coffee and have a meeting there. So these amenities come sort of in balance, in harmony, and I think the whole open concept really needs to be handled by each client's needs.
But also, I think the biggest challenge for designers is providing focus in a place that's very open. Because as Annie said, once you lower the partitions, they're no longer be 6 feet. 42 is the maximum now. It's going to be open. And so providing, for us as designers, is figure out how to provide focused environments that's not just headphones in there. Because we're never going to go back, because most of businesses want collaboration and understand that innovation happens in interstitial spaces where you kind of meet by happen chance. So it's a different, there's still a lot of things to be settled and figured out, but the great thing is the designers have a big challenge in the next, how to figure out how to make this work.
With the healthcare, the open spaces have actually helped us a lot. The analogy I brought up at the beginning with the Cedars-Sinai, I was at NYU a couple of weeks ago for a very intense emergency in my family, and it literally took us 20 minutes to get from the entry point of reception to the urgent care center on the 4th floor. CityMD, although the spaces are much smaller, they're very simply laid out. We make it so easy for the patients not to get lost in mazes of corridors once they leave the exam room if they have to go to a lab. It's basically all laid out on that central corridor, which gives those doctors the gravitas and eludes that confidence. The exam rooms are basically double loaded against the corridor, and it's a big program that's squeezed into a relatively small footprint. But we have really simplified the open waiting room. We've made it in a way where you basically go to check-in, sit, and then it's nearly a straight line most of the time to the exam rooms, and nobody gets lost. And it's easy on you may. But occasionally.
Occasionally.
I'm going to take another question.
So first, I could speak for the millennials. We don't mind the labels so long as we get free Wi-Fi out of it. Michael, I hope you guys are exploring that. I'm sure you are. So one thing, a notion that was mentioned early on is that in hospitality, the design is really kind of the pinnacle of what we're able to design, or what designers are able to put out, and then that trickles down into office, residential, hospitality. There's one aspect of the design that I find even some of the best hotel designers or brands have not been able to execute. And it's placed when you're in Neuehouse that you see, it's the artwork. The collection here is amazing. When it comes to our hotels, the artwork sometimes, in my opinion, falls short. I'm wondering, from a design perspective, either residential or operational perspective, how artwork has come into play, both from the design side and the sourcing side, but also what guests and what clients want.
One thing we're just looking at right now is technology we talked about. It's sort of the new luxury technology can actually provide content in different ways and installations. And much like you have at PS1, you have installations. So I think there's going to be more emphasis on less than framed art than installations, things that are more immersive, connective, and how technology can actually provide content and change and variability. So it's going to change like the idea of art, because curated art is really not accessible and affordable from a hotel, 4-star or even 5-star. But it's only a few places that can really afford really great art. So I think these other ways in what we're doing in 15 Hudson Yards is to create this sort of installation about nature, indoor, outdoor. You're right there, the High Line, which is where nature's taken over the urban structure. And from the very beginning, you're thinking about that conversation between nature and buildings, because it's very open on the sort of plaza level.
Okay, we're out of time right now, so thank you all for joining us. And I want to just thank my outstanding panel again. And please take advantage of this cool space we're in. We have 1 more hour that we could drink, mix, mingle, and look forward to seeing you outside. Thank you.